Good morning, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the French-Australian-New Zealand Business Days. And this year, the theme of the forum is Shaping Attractive Cities. Our opening panel is From Cities to Social Economic Hub, How Infrastructure Delivers Sustainable Future Growth. Welcome, everyone. My name is Benedict Collin, and I'm the president of the French-Australian Chamber of Commerce of Industry. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respect to the elders past and future. I also would like to thank the French-Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry for the organization of these business days, as well as the French Embassy, Schneider Electric, our naming sponsor, Austrade, and all the other sponsors for their support throughout. More than ever, Australia-New Zealand long-term prosperity is linked to the performance of its cities. And this trend is not unique to Australia and New Zealand, and many countries around the world are also rapidly urbanizing and taking advantage of socio-economic opportunities that growing cities can bring. The sustainability of cities can also contribute to its attractivity. That's in the context also of COVID-19, which is having an unprecedented impact on cities, and you name it, with lockdown, social distancing, working from home, and all different patterns and behaviors, which will force cities to adapt and reinvent themselves. To explore this topic, I'm joined by 4 leaders and experts in the infrastructure sector. Romilly Mediu, CEO of Infrastructure Australia, Pascal Perez, Director at Smart Infrastructure Facility, University of Wollongong, Gareth O'Reilly, Australian New Zealand Zone President and MD at Schneider Electric, and Anuj Ojit, MD for Turner & Townsend, Asia Pacific. Thank you very much all for your time and accepting to discuss this topic on panel. So what I might do is first turn to each of you with a topic, and then we'll carry on with a more free discussion. And by all means, feel free to interrupt, raise your hand, and we can agree to disagree also to make it live for our participants. My first question really is for you. You are the CEO of Infrastructure Australia, the nation independent infrastructure advisor, and IA released in August an updated edition of the 2020 infrastructure priority list, with on its list more than 60 billion investment. I was wondering whether you could share with us your the views of the infrastructure priority list. Has there been, in the context of COVID, a reprioritization? And how is COVID affecting the way we should prioritize projects and the role of public policy in the current context of navigating uncertainty?
Great, thanks very much, Benedict, for the opportunity. So I'll just explain who IA is and what we do. So we were established in 2008 to drive better infrastructure outcomes for all Australians. And we have 2 core functions. So the first is to evaluate business cases for nationally significant investment proposals, seeking more than $100 million from the Commonwealth Government. And this is the basis for inclusion in the infrastructure priority list, which you mentioned, which now showcases more than 65 billion of nationally significant infrastructure investments for government at all levels to choose from. The second area that we work in is to set the agenda on the long-term opportunities for infrastructure reform that will improve living standards and national productivity. And we do this through a number of ways, including through the Australian Infrastructure Plan, which is due to be released in 2021, and also last year's 2019 Australian Infrastructure Audit. I just want to touch on COVID quickly before I go to talk about the IPL, which is the priority list. The involving impacts of COVID have been front of mind of Infrastructure Australia and all the jurisdictions and the I bodies for the past year. And it really is a unique period of uncertainty for the sector. Everyone knows we're facing border closures, supply chain vulnerability, reduced private sector expenditure, reduced site access, reduced access to overseas manufactured goods, and limited staff availability due to illness or quarantine. At the same time, COVID has accelerated changes in the way we use infrastructure, impacting work practices, settlement patterns, activity in our CBDs, public and active transport use. As we shift even further towards digitisation and remote service delivery, you've just got to look at us all today that we're doing this remotely. But the important thing that we're noticing and that people need to understand is the depth and the longevity of these impacts on the infrastructure sector are still largely unknown. What we do know is that maintaining a pipeline of nationally significant infrastructure investments is a crucial first step in managing and recovering from the social and economic impacts of COVID. Nationally significant infrastructure projects are long-term investments, typically considering a 30-year view of the project's social, environmental and economic impacts. In responding to the challenges of COVID, we have tried to take a long-term view using the best data available. To support the efficient, best practice assessment and approval of projects for stimulus, we have been working closely with our cross-jurisdictional colleagues over the last 6 to 12 months to minimise duplication of policies, processes and projects. This streamlining focus is creating a national approach to information sharing, utilising best practice procedures to encourage growth and development in our city, rural and regional and remote areas. Beyond capital projects, the need for short-term stimulus that has rightly been prioritised in the recent federal budget, we need to focus on reform to shape Australia's long-term recovery response. It's timely that our theme for this event is shaping attractive cities. Australian cities are unique in their diversity. Their contribution to our economy and quality of life provide a critical opportunity to tackle systematic policy changes across sectors. Challenges for all of us post-COVID is to deliver flexible, agile and resilient infrastructure services that better respond to the changing and diverse community needs. And I just want to finally touch on the pipeline and the importance of the pipeline. The federal government has made 3 tranches of infrastructure investment over the last year, and in every case, over 50% of those announcements have included projects that were looking for more than $100 million in federal funding. And of those, of the announcements they've made, over 50% are either on our priority list or projects that we've already assessed. So it shows the importance of the pipeline. In the last budget, 105 projects were announced across Australia in the last budget. Of those, 30 were seeking more than 100 million from the federal government. Of those 30, 17 have already been assessed by IA, and the 13 we know that we'll see through the IA process. But the point I'm trying to make is pipelines are really important, and if any time to illustrate that is now, because when they've been making these announcements, many of those announcements, as I've just said, have been on our pipeline. So the work that we do in working with the jurisdictions to make sure that the pipeline is fit for purpose, is up to date, and picking up those economic and social infrastructure projects is crucially important, and no more than has been this year. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll unmute myself. Thanks very much, Romilly, for pointing out the importance of the pipeline. I'm sure we'll touch base later with Anush around the importance for the construction sector. I was going to ask my second question to you, Pascal, and also Romilly touched on the importance of how COVID has affected the way we use infrastructure. You are the director of the Smart Infrastructure University facility at Wollongong, and you've been leading the path and insisting on how can we better use data and strive for innovation and sustain the use of infrastructure over the long term. So I was wondering if you could touch on this topic, Pascal.
Thank you, Benedict. Yes, Smart Infrastructure Facility here at University of Wollongong is 10 years young still. And when we were funded by the federal and state government in New South Wales, our mandate was and still is to look at infrastructure, networks, systems and services, not in isolation, so water for water or electricity for electricity, but from a holistic perspective, and try to understand the synergies and trade-offs and how these synergies or trade-offs impact or contribute to urban and regional development in Australia. So from that perspective, we had a keen interest in data and modeling and simulation from day one. And this is still a core activity at Smart, but also because any kind of data nowadays has to be smart by definition. Over the last 5 years, we've done a lot of work on not only looking at these smart environments around us, but also designing, developing, and deploying sensors out there for smart cities or infrastructure 4.0. So trying to answer your question in a relatively short amount of time, I see three main domains of application of data and smart data nowadays for infrastructure and sustainability of infrastructure. The first one is about the physical sustainability of these infrastructure networks and systems. And here I'm talking about asset deterioration. This is nothing new in terms of monitoring. If you think about railways, and especially in Japan, I think the bullet train, the Japanese bullet train Shinkansen, has been full of sensors monitoring everything for the last 15 years at least, and being able to provide all this information in real time to the computer at the level of the local of the train. So this is not new. What's new now is the fact that these sensors are becoming cheaper. They're becoming smaller most of the time, so they're ubiquitous. And we can harness a lot of artificial intelligence, AI, to them. And that's where the strength is. And I think the key objective there is to move from what is the status of my asset now, whether it's a bridge, a train, or a building, into what will be the state of this asset in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year. That's the next grail for all of us. The second aspect in terms of how data is important for sustainability related to infrastructure is in terms of usage, so consumer. And here it's about how many users do you have turning their tap at the same time? How many users are turning their, switching on their electricity at the same time? And where are the sweet spots in terms of financial sustainability for the operators, for example, in terms of deploying the assets in a way that avoid, as we've heard over the last couple of years in Australia, gold-plated networks and systems, and much leaner systems because they're more responsive. And the third aspect of sustainability I can think about from the kind of research we're doing at SMART is probably the most innovative, and that's where I think there's a lot of work to be done. It's about user feedback. If you think about infrastructure, whether it's water, electricity, roads, rail, you name them, the user, sorry to be blunt here, is always the problem. If the water network doesn't cope, it's because of the bloody users. If the electricity network doesn't cope, it's because of the bloody users, and so on and so forth. With this smart data revolution we all being part of, there's a way to what we, there's a stream of research. We're collaborating with French researchers in Toulouse at University Paul Sabatier, and I'm happy to name them there. It's something called eco-feedback. So how can you provide enough information to any kind of user or any kind of manager in a given environment at a given moment in order for these individuals to take decisions that can provide better management for the whole system? So think about electricity and the usual thing we have with electricity, the peak demand. Why can't we provide now information to users who are keen to protect the system with information that would help them to take the decision to turn off the washing machine now because the substation next door is reaching capacity. This is the kind of thing we can do now. We haven't really worked out yet the interface between technology and social responses, but it's there, it's ready. And more closer to us and back to COVID as, of course, an underlying theme for all of us here. We've undertaken a recent study with our colleagues from Meshed IoT as industry partner about the use of transport and the use of the streets in cities using a small sensor called Encounter, developed by our colleague from Meshed IoT across 24 councils in Australia to look at how people reacted to COVID-19 and more specifically the social distancing that happened roughly between 25th of March and 25th of May this year, and then the second wave after that. And it's fascinating. This is the kind of data that we can access very readily, and we can share with everyone to take better decisions when the next wave will happen, because they will be the next wave.
Thanks very much, Pascal. And I think you've given us lots of topic to explore in the second part of this discussion: physical sustainability, financial sustainability, and users' feedback. And we'll talk later about more community engagement. And I can tell you, as an infrastructure investor, physical sustainability and doing proactive maintenance and planning your capex and maintenance is it's a very topical theme at the moment in our investments. I'm going to turn to Gareth, and Gareth, you are the ANZ president of and MD of Schneider Electric here in Australia. And I wanted to explore with you the use of technology and innovation, but more importantly about energy transition. And I know that you've been advocating that COVID recovery must be a green one. And I was wondering whether you could share with us how clean energy, digital transformation, and innovation are really fundamental to building a more resilient and sustainable world.
Thank you, Benedict, and thank you for the invitation. Well, I should first explain what Schneider is and why we care about this. So we believe in access to energy, and today more than ever, access to digital is a basic human right. Now, what we spend our time working and waking up to every day is how we combine energy and digital technologies for homes, for buildings, for the digital infrastructure, data centers that are getting built there today, infrastructure at large, and manufacturing and industry, which support resilience, which support sustainability, and which drive efficiency, productivity for our customers. Now, we've been advocating for change and building on what Pascal said. There's a lot more that we can do. As we focus on ensuring a fast and sustainable economic recovery in Australia, we should take the opportunity to learn from the past and make sure that we build infrastructure that's for the 21st century, learn from the mistakes of the past, and make sure we don't harm our planet and create a more sustainable, resilient economy in the process. Now, if we look at climate change, it's fundamentally an energy issue. About 80% of CO2 emissions result from the production or consumption of energy, and 40% of that is in buildings, 40% of it is in industrial process, and 20% of it is in transport or mobility. Now, interestingly, where we start from, Australia ranks last in least developed nations in terms of energy efficiency, so how we actually use it at the end point. So there's a lot of upside and potential right there. The construction industry globally, and this is reflected here as well, is it ranks last in terms of productivity compared to a lot of other sectors. And I think one of the fundamental reasons for that, it's one of the least digital in terms of how it goes about its business. So our estimate is about 5% penetration of digital technology in the construction sector compared to others that are 60, 70, 80%. So a lot in how we build, but also how we manage assets as well. The construction industry, the building itself contributes about 11% of CO2 emissions through the construction cycle, mainly because the materials used in it, whether it be cement, glass, or materials, are hard to decarbonize manufacturing process. And the other part of this is the construction process itself in delivery is inefficient, so about 10% of those materials are wasted. So there's a lot of opportunity at source to look at how we use materials and decarbonize the materials, and secondly, digitizing the construction process to make it more sustainable. Now, the good news is we're not starting from zero. There's really positive momentum in Australia. If we look at how energy is generated, we believe that electricity is the answer because it's the only source that can eventually become zero carbon. The momentum here is phenomenal. 1 in 4 homes has already some form of distributed renewable energy. And increasingly in industrial and commercial applications, we also see the same, as well as the decarbonization of our electricity system. And we think that Australia can get to 75% renewable electricity generation by 2025. So we can help by decarbonizing how energy is created. Now, the most important change we need to think about is the way we think, the way we design buildings, the way we design industries, and the way we design cities. We must think of them to be sustainable. We must think of them to be digital, to build on the point that Pascal made. There's a digital promise that sits in front of us if we get it right, and it has to be built on an energy system that is electrified. Now, in many ways, norms, standards, education are anchored in 20th century thinking. And this is not an either-or proposition of economic recovery and sustainable recovery. You can do both. And the great news is the technologies exist today. So the consumers that Pascal mentions in their interaction as prosumers with how they use utilities is available today. It's not available tomorrow, and is being deployed today to balance the needs of our energy system to be more sustainable. Well, the path forward, I think Romilly mentioned it, is the construction sector has a real promise ahead of it to be a key driver of economic recovery. So one part is sustainable infrastructure to make sure we are a productive and sustainable nation. The second point I would make is that new construction is good, but it must be met in a sustainable and digital way. The other point I'd like to make is the other part of our economy that presents great promise for economic and sustainable recovery is how we look at the buildings and assets and infrastructures and manufacturing plants that we have today. So if we go deploy existing digital solutions, re-electrification and decarbonization of existing assets, we can save typically up to 30% of efficiency generation in those assets today. Now, the really good news is it also creates jobs, thousands of jobs, according to the Energy Efficiency Council. Where do we start? So we commit to net zero emissions through electric and digital pathways. If we look at digitizing construction, both new and old, we will generate productivity. The other benefit is speed. You can deploy digital solutions in weeks, not in months, not in years. You can do it today. And the great news is you don't need to tear down a building because in some ways the most sustainable building is the one you don't have to build. If we look to prepare our transport systems for the mass take-up of electric vehicles, the last key plank of decarbonizing our economy and creating sustainability and livable communities. And if we look at digitally enabled buildings, homes, infrastructure, and manufacturing, this will enable distributed, decarbonized energy systems. The last point I'd like to make is digital has the benefit of speed of deployment and skills development, and it's future-proof. It can be deployed now, it can be deployed locally, and it could create skills for the 21st century, both in quantity, but more importantly, in quality.
Thanks very much, Gareth, for these remarks, and I think it's a very good transition with you, Anush, to respond to some extent to Gareth, because your organization, Tanner and Tansen, is involved in the design, development, and delivery of significant infrastructure projects. Actually, right now you are sitting next to a key one for Australia, Snowy Hydro. So I was going to wonder if you could respond to Gareth and sort of possibly illustrate how can the construction sector contribute to building more sustainable and resilient infrastructure, and where do you see the current hurdle now and where are the hurdles and opportunities in the current COVID environment?
Thank you, Benedict, and indeed as well for giving us the opportunity to be on the panel. And I think Gareth and Romilly and Pascal have already articulated quite a lot of the challenges of the industry, of the construction industry, that is. But I suppose I'll probably start with a little bit of philosophical way of looking at it, I guess, in terms of how pivotal the construction industry is to this whole agenda. And I do think, for not just obvious reasons, but that it is completely pivotal to making it all happen. Because at the end of the day, that's what the industry does, is to make these things happen. You know, the way we live, the way we work, the way we entertain ourselves have all been absolutely key factors in what we design and what we build over time. And what we've found, there's another factor that's been brought in over the last few years, and probably quite a last few years, is climate. And I think Gareth touched on some of these things already, but the climate conditions are no doubt now bringing in an additional factor in what we build, how we build things, and so forth, in order to be able to adapt to the conditions. So more of the climate adaptation type factors are coming to the fore in the way we build our cities, or indeed the way construction happens as well. And I guess the industry itself, has got a massive part to play, as I said. And one of the reasons why I think infrastructure projects, the point I'd like to make on that is they are very expensive. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. They are extremely expensive to happen, and I'm sure that is no doubt one of the big criteria for why there needs to be prioritization of many of these projects. They are needed. They will make the industry more sustainable, where the economy more sustainable, but also the environment more sustainable. All these things are required, but they are expensive. And I'm sure Romilly spends quite a lot of time looking at the ways and means to try and prioritize these things. So I do think that I think Gareth touched on this already, in that the part that the construction industry can play with regards to that. I think there is no doubt we have a real opportunity to transform performance. We still see many projects and programs, blowouts happening and so on and so forth. Clearly, in this current environment, to make things sustainable, we have to find ways of doing these projects better, cheaper, faster, and so forth. Because at the end of the day, many of the projects I'm sure that Romilly is looking at, we want them, and we want them to happen, but there's a finite amount that we can afford. And I think the cheaper we make these things, the better quality, and so forth. I think the more of those projects we can have, and I think the more of a sustainable environment that we can create. I mean, these are topics that have been debated for a number of years and so forth. I've got no doubt, and whether it be around digitalization or reducing waste and everything else, I think Gareth touched on quite a few of them already. But I think that there is no doubt a burning platform right now. With the advancement of technology, with digitalization happening at pace, and I think even as you mentioned, Benedict, with COVID, what it's done actually in some ways, aside from all the negative aspects of COVID, but it's also accelerated a lot of those digitalization of the industry, an industry that is, as Gareth mentioned, is probably one of the least digitalized that exists at the moment. So, we have seen some of the key aspects, whether it be around off-site manufacturing, design for manufacture, which I think is a key component of advancement that we are starting to see, but also how we improve productivity through digitalization. I think, as was mentioned, right now there are some challenges as well, because of course COVID has provided an element of productivity loss, given the way we need to work in this current environment. But these things are not necessarily enduring. I think we need to probably learn from that and look at, there's no doubt this way, an opportunity to transform the performance of construction delivery and construction project. The construction industry itself is ripe, and it's quite exciting as well.
Do you mind, Benedict?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's interesting. I didn't reflect on it when I was thinking about this session, and it's a point that Gareth made as well. We talked about sustainability and we talk about digitization, which we've all talked about. But an area that we must also talk about, and we identified it and talked about it in the 2019 audit, is equity and equitable infrastructure. And so we talk about access, quality, and cost. So if you think about telecommunications and the NBN, during COVID, we've clearly seen where those who have access to digital, we were able to stay online and so on and so forth. But it did show inequality where telecommunications hadn't come into those communities. And it really brought that to the front, that we needed to think about that equity in regions when it came to digitization, because all of a sudden we were all working from home. And so it really brought it to the fore. The other point I think that Andre raised is about collaboration. You reflected on it, and it's the one thing that we've all said with infrastructure this year is we're collaborating the best that we've ever collaborated in the sector. We've never collaborated. We can't lose that. We need to maintain that to improve and transition our sector, and don't lose this opportunity to keep collaborating. And then I just want to again pick up on a point Gareth made, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but the World Economic Forum have released 6 elements of sustainable infrastructure. Gareth, you used the term sustainable infrastructure, and I was like, oh. And they say the 6 qualities of sustainable infrastructure are benefit sharing, So that just comes up with the equity, and equality, which I just talked about. Environmental resilience, social acceptability, economic and institutional effectiveness, which you've been talking about, future-proofing, and critical mass potential. And I think all those themes really resonate with everything we've been talking about so far.
Thanks, Romilly. And actually, that was going to be a topic that I wanted to explore, which was more about, inclusiveness and the fact that COVID has exacerbated multiple forms of inequalities. You mentioned inequalities in access to technology, and really raised fundamental questions about the future of urban living and making sure that we don't live in two speeds neighborhoods or districts. And I was just wondering whether either, Pascal, Gareth, or Anush, you wanted to comment around how technology can be a driver of greater inclusion, diversity, and collaboration, which Romilly just mentioned.
Okay, I'll step in. It's interesting because earlier today I had a discussion with colleagues from other universities about a potential project around the impact of COVID and telework in the future and different aspects, including social equity or inequity in this case. If I'm bluntly honest, I think that at the moment, technology and digital technology is more a factor of segregation and inequities than a unifying concept. We literally living every day people on the side of this revolution. As I used to say, we French people, we know about revolution. We're not good at it, but we know about it. Revolution starts with people and with people. What we have so far is something that starts with technology and end with technology. And we have to address that because that's an epidemic. That's not a revolution. So we need to make sure, back to what Gareth said and Romilly and Anush touched upon it as well, we need to embark people on with us. We cannot deploy technology out there, whether it's infrastructure or in cities and buildings, and pretend people will be very happy with it and will understand the benefit of it. And we cannot ignore the people who will not get it. I've got a mother-in-law, she's 90. She's been very good with the computer, but there's a point where she cannot cope anymore. And there's other vulnerable communities out there that we need to take care of. So yes, in principle, are we there yet? No. And we need to all of us work together to fix the problem.
Probably if I just jump in there, Pascal, you make very good points because I mentioned that we need to be focused on where infrastructure and focus is on building skills of tomorrow so that we build a sustainable economy. So it's about making sure that we don't create a digital divide between those that have the skills and those that don't. So if we're to focus on that, the constructors of today, the constructors of tomorrow, if we equip them with the digital skills, capabilities, and maybe that's through making sure that one great way to recreate infrastructure is create a digital twin. So if you create digital capabilities across today, yes, new infrastructure, but existing infrastructure, you create the digital trades of tomorrow, and that creates those machine learnings and artificial intelligence platforms that can actually create productivity. So you've got great opportunity here to upskill a whole generation of trades to be digital trades of tomorrow. And from that then comes a decrease of the digital divide. It comes with an opportunity to create those efficiencies that we all speak to. And so that people feel that the infrastructure that are coming and building around them is part of them and it's part of their skill. Because as a constructor, one of the great things you can do is when it's built, you step back and look at it and said, I was part of that. I made that happen. And that could be in a digital way. It could be in a physical way as well. On the concept of the other divide is on sustainability, is democratizing what can happen from a sustainability perspective. It's not the realm of those that can afford a system or a solution. It has to be something that everybody can afford, and it can also be something that is easy to interact with. So if we look to residential prosumer systems, some of the areas that we're working on today, where it makes it super easy. You don't have to be an energy architect to understand how to use your energy. It guides you, and if you choose to be in the decision process, you can. And if you choose not to be, you can become an active energy participant in the market, making or trading energy without ever having to do anything. So those technologies exist today, and equally so for the commercial and industrial sector, whether you're in construction or other sectors, also has the benefit of now creating an energy system and an infrastructure system with digital technologies that democratizes that capability. And you don't need an army of data scientists to make that happen. It makes it super easy for people. So there's great ideas that exist today. Those technologies exist today. And as I said, the great opportunity behind all of this is we can create the digital trades of tomorrow in the process as well.
Yeah.
Anush, did you want to comment on the role of the construction sector in upgrading skills?
100%. No, thank you for that. Obviously, we signed from behind a little bit on the whole usage of technology, but certainly, I think I concur with the point there. If anything, this whole COVID, whilst it's created an element of segregation, as you mentioned, Benedict, but there's a massive amount of inclusivity that have happened as well on the back of technology, because everybody feels more connected. Whilst we all feel quite distant, but there's a lot more connection that have happened. And I think what we are starting to see, certainly from a construction industry perspective, more connection from the design, from the need of the users, as Pascal mentioned earlier on, through to the design, through to the actual construction process as well, through digital twin and so forth. There is absolutely more inclusion and more inclusivity. And we are starting to see some of those silos broken. Unfortunately, it has been an industry with a lot of silos in the past, but a lot of that is being broken. I think, technology is clearly connecting all these things. We, of course, need to get the commercial models and everything else to connect, to force that connection and some of the enablers around that. But certainly, there's a lot of traction. I think, as I said earlier, technology is absolutely an enabler to be, to get that connectivity happening more and more.
All of you in your different intervention mentioned the need to build infrastructure that is affordable and that is actually easy to use and that connects us. But I was going to ask you, how do we actually make sure that there is some community engagement right from the outset? And how do we ensure that the community is part of the thinking and planning process in building infrastructure or using infrastructure in the best way? I know that Romilly and Pascal, it's a topic that is very dear to your heart.
Yeah, Infrastructure Australia feels it's incredibly important to take the community on the journey with any infrastructure project. And there's been a number of cases where infrastructure projects have been delayed or stopped because they didn't take the community with them. And we've been talking about technology today, and I think Anush makes a really good point in that with technology now, we can bring more of the community with us when we're making these decisions in the planning stage, because before you'd go to a town hall and it might be on a Wednesday night, but with technology, with Zoom, with social media, there's a better way to attract and engage with more of the community. But it's really important that with any infrastructure project, the community are brought on board, and it's a place-based approach. Infrastructure Australia has written substantially on the importance of engaging with the community and taking their views and incorporating them in, but not just up front, the whole way through. That engagement should be part of the governance being considered when any of these projects are being planned and then constructed and then maintained, because who are we building for? We're building for the community, and a lot of the time the money is coming from taxpayers. So it's incredibly important to be able to be transparent about these projects. And I think this discussion is really exciting in talking about technology, because there is no excuse anymore not to engage with the community, because we actually have those tools now to do that and to capture the net wider.
And to actually build infrastructure that they're actually going to use them based on Pascal's data. Pascal, did you want to comment on Romilly's point?
My data and data from other people as well. Yeah, well, so data is one thing, but data is only data. Let's get clear about that. I can put a sensor in air quality or counting people or counting vehicles, as we do on many projects around Sydney and Western Sydney in particular. That's fine. The key thing is first, how can you transform data into intelligible information? And by intelligible information, I mean that it's all source for courses already. What's meaningful and intelligible for Romilly or Gareth or Anuj or myself might be totally different from people from the local communities or the local business community that would be impacted. And then, more importantly, we have to transform information into actionable knowledge. And that's where I think, for the moment, this smart data revolution falls short in many cases to try to really get the added value of getting this information becoming knowledge you can act upon. And part of the reason is that, again, we do not engage with all the players. And of course, they're the end users, they're the residents, but also the managers, everybody who has to be part of the issue has to be part of defining the problem in the first place. This is not rocket science. This is not something we're discovering now. Nearly 17 years ago, coming from Europe mainly, there was this school of thought in engineering called collective design. And collective design was exactly that. It's been used in the automotive industry for 4 decades now and more. We just to adapt it to the current context in which we are. I just had one thing. Yes, now I'm working on all these serious things, roads and electricity and water. But for 20 years of my life, I've been working on as important things, but not front and center of this discussion, which is environmental engineering and agricultural engineering in Western Africa, in Indonesia, many parts of the world. Engagement with communities has been at the forefront of whatever we've been doing in that domain for the last 40 years. There's no environmental engineer I know who would not start thinking about how he's going to engage or she's going to engage with the local communities at large. It doesn't have to be the village or the town. It can be also the local authorities, of course. We have to learn from other domains that have implemented these approaches already.
Thanks very much, Pascal, and a very topical reminder of thinking broader. There's a topic that I wanted to explore with all of you in the current context of COVID, where we are working from home. There's been more social distancing, restrictions on travel, and whether there's been talks about is it the death of the CBDs and the rise of suburbia, or actually sometimes the reverse? So what does it mean in terms when we talk about the attractiveness of cities? Is that what do we mean by cities, pretty much? So just throwing it there and seeing who wants to comment on it.
Maybe
you are on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I need a mug. You're on mute. It's been really interesting this last period that we've been in with COVID, in that our communities are becoming our villages because we're shopping locally, we're meeting more people locally. There's been like this reset. But if you think about last year before we came into COVID, we kept saying that we had this huge infrastructure pipeline and it was a catch up and there was all this congestion in our cities. And it feels like we've just slowed everything down a little bit. Our cities will always, but we're very urbanised in Australia. Our 4 biggest cities, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne and Perth, will always be our cities. But what we are seeing, and many of us, and I'm sure the others have examples of this, is there has been a reset. We all won't go back full time. We will work more flexibly. It shows that there are more opportunities to think differently about our workplaces. IA moved offices in the middle of COVID, and we've onboarded 15 staff in the middle of COVID. And it was a really great experience because it's taught us so much about communication and what we can do. And I really just think it's an opportunity to think differently that we possibly needed. It was like, many people have said, and I'm sure Pascal will agree, nature was trying to scream at us to slow down and we weren't listening, and now we've been forced to listen and we've been forced to act. Our cities will always be our cities and they're really important, but they're changing. It's forced us to think differently. And one of the things that has come out of COVID that we haven't talked about is our use of blue and green infrastructure. That's really important infrastructure. And what's the one thing we all needed in COVID? We all wanted to go for a walk. We all wanted to go outside. And we're now appreciating the importance of green infrastructure as part of our cities. And so it's kind of like we're thinking about things differently. So I see it as COVID has been a terrible thing, both economically and health-wise, and we can't take away or belittle that at all. But there's been a lot of learnings from it as well, and opportunities to think about our cities differently.
Thanks, Romilly. Gareth, I could see, and Anush, that you wanted to comment.
I think very similar sentiments now. A city as it is one of the most sustainable ways and productive ways for an economy to survive. So is this a temporary view? Is it something, perhaps it may refresh us in terms of how we think on commuting, on engagement, but I think at its forefront, we're people, we need to connect with people. And in a business context, CBDs are a big part of that story. They may be different, I don't know. But I think it has woken us up to the power of community. Distribution of how we operate is a good thing. And if I reflect on a period of my life, I lived in Hong Kong in 2003 when SARS hit. And that was my first personal experience of a pandemic, and one that I don't wish to relive. And for one particular point to note is the level of communication and the ability to interact with people back then was so different than we could do today. So I think it's reframed everything that we can and do in a city, but I think a city is still such a fundamental part of a thriving economy and will remain so. It'll be different, but as I said before, I think we also need to consider the sustainability of that. And if we need to travel less every now and then, that isn't such a bad thing.
Anush?
Yes, yeah, it's quite a tricky one, this one, I guess, because on the one hand, you know, as you said there, yeah, is it a death of the CBD? I think it's, I think I'd probably say those 4 major cities in Australia, certainly they will prevail. And it's not, I think sometimes we've got to be probably a little bit careful as well around the new norm, which is often a word that's used. And is it a new norm? The challenge, I guess, is no one really knows at the moment. But I think what Romilly mentioned quite rightly so too, that, you know, it feels like there is going to be a bit of a change that needs to happen. It's a bit of a reset. And I think it works both ways as well, because I think well-being of people, because I think most people have enjoyed a lot of working from home and so forth, but there are downsides to it as well. And we are seeing more and more of these, the well-being challenges and of distance, of being distanced, I guess. So I think probably, you know, I always think about these things with a bit of a balance, I guess, in that, you know, there will probably be some changes, but probably more of a balance. I very much doubt it's the death of the CBD. If anything, you know, the vibrancy, I think more and more people do want to come back to the cities and get it vibrant again. And I think that's fair to say. Right now, it probably is it feels a bit of a challenge. But I guess the point that, you know, I think, Romilly, you made there around the reset is, you know, at the same time, it's not the first time there have been crises and things like that happened, and, you know, whether it be financial crisis or health crises that have happened before. And all too often, we kind of go back to what it was before anyway. It might take years, but we always go back. And I think, as you rightly said, there's an opportunity we have in front of us to actually adopt some of those really good changes that have happened, and then make it more enduring, I guess, and learn from it, so that we do make it long lasting rather than just a one-off.
So if it's not the death, it's kind of a sort of a reset and rebalancing between villages or communities versus CBDs, and it does affect the way we commute, the way we move from one place to another. I think Romilly pointed out that last year we were talking about massive traffic congestions and how do we actually prioritize transport projects in those circumstances. Pascal, I can see you are nodding a lot. Did you want to comment around this?
I've been sitting on the fence on that debate for quite a while, but I think I have to jump out of the fence now. I can reassure you, Benedict, you're going to see congestion again. For the better or the worse.
I don't know if it's reassuring.
Now, two thoughts I'd like to share with you and the audience. First, apart from my passion for infrastructure, I've got a passion for history, and always try to learn from history. And when you look at the Black Death during medieval times in Europe, and you look at the Spanish flu closer to us, start of the last century, there was no evidence of any major modification of urban growth during these 2 periods. There was a slowdown, definitely. There was a massive health impact, definitely, much bigger than the one we face now worldwide. There was one major consequence in terms of urban design was sanitation, especially for medieval cities. But in terms of the way we were using cities, nothing changed. They evolved, and they're the ones we know now. So let's step back a little bit, let's breathe, think, and let's think about the next step. So closer to us now, what's going to change really? Honestly, at university level, I can see now people nearly banging the door to come back because they're totally claustrophobic, and many of us have their horizon shrinking, literally, staying at home. So we need to have this face-to-face contact. What might change, and I hope will change, is the way we put value on our commuting time. That's my big hope, that instead of trying, whether we are in a train, in a car, or even on a bicycle, to go from A to B as fast as possible, can we finally, as a society, look at this travel, this journey, as a productive one, and eventually slowing it down, because you can stop at the coffee shop and start working from the coffee shop, or even your car. I stopped twice on my way from Gerringong to Wollongong this morning, taking 2 calls, and I'm sure many of us do it, but we feel bad about it. We need to rethink CBDs, cities, and home to work journey in a much broader, much more flexible context. That would be a fantastic outcome from this dreadful period.
That's a very interesting point. I'm going to quiz you, Romilly, because I think there were talks about, the 30-minute cities and the 15-minute cities. Are we going to actually change? And a bit like when you do passenger journey and you using the travel time from door to door, but in terms of including it like in a work time experience. Very keen to hear your views, Romilly.
So when it comes to modelling and forecasting and thinking about, 15-minute, 30-minute cities, I agree with Pascal. Congestion, and we're already seeing it in Perth and Brisbane, because their impact was slightly different. They're getting back pretty much to normal when it comes to congestion. I think it'll give us time to rethink. We have to give time to see what the net interstate migration is and what the movement of people is, and that takes time. So, if we're going to rethink about this 30-minute city, it'll be interesting if we have this conversation in 2 years' time. I don't think it's a decision that we're going to have over 6 months. It takes time to see the lagging population forecasts come through. So I think I'm really interested in all this discussion, and I wanted just to raise with Pascal quickly, when you think about the Spanish flu, though, Pascal, we didn't have the technology then that we have now. So I agree with you about sanitisation and the lessons learned from history, but I was picking up on some of the points that Gareth made, and I wonder whether in 2 years' time it'd be really lovely if all of us got together and have another conversation, because it'd be really interesting to see where we actually are, where we've landed following COVID, because we've probably got another year to go or more, and I think the technology actually is, and Gareth keeps talking about this, I actually think that's going to be the bit that's really does push us and change us and challenge us.
Well, I'm very happy to reconvene that same panel in 2 years' time. Gareth, did you want to mention something? I could see a...
No, I think if I was to take one point, I like Pascal, I'm a student of history, and sanitation was one of the solves for the diseases that went through medieval times. And if I was to say, is one of the things that we could try and eliminate through this process is carbon emissions. So if we took this opportunity to sanitize our economy in a different way, but at the same time create jobs and create prosperity and create a path forward. So if I view the sanitization of the 21st century, it'd be decarbonization.
Well, actually, it's a good transition, because I can see Jerome waving, telling me that we've got only 5 minutes left. So what I was going to ask you, and maybe Gareth, you started answering my question, is whether each of you could share one good thing that came out of COVID, and what's your vision for the future of the cities. So I don't know, who wants to volunteer first? Gareth?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think people have appreciated, if we take it at a very personal level, I think we've all appreciated community and family possibly in different ways. So speaking personally, I jumped on planes far too often, and I probably may do that again, but I certainly think about it before I do it again. I think it is the digital promise that may have been lurking in the background has certainly been sprung forward, I think, at pace. I think, and I genuinely believe, if I go back to a context where we had significant bushfires, people seeing the benefit of perhaps not doing certain things and the fact that it can have on their personal sustainability outcomes. I hope, to Anuja's point, that is one of those things that stays with us all as a path forward. And I think how we view work, if we go back what the fundamental of work is, you know, apart from task-driven activities, it is fundamentally about connecting and collaborating with people. And that does not have to be done at the same time, every day, in the same place, from an 8 to 5 regime. I think we can fundamentally think that, and if we get it right, we can reduce congestion, we can reduce the peaks that we see in our various city systems, whether it be water, electricity, or transport, to make a more balanced system. And that'll be my hope for tomorrow.
Thanks, Gareth. Anuj?
Yeah, I suppose they're just, I think, very, very comprehensive there, that what Gareth mentioned. But I guess just, you know, I just think of the city of the future. I think, as you said there, I guess 3 words come to my mind. Is that one is that connected and vibrant. Those are 2 key things, because I think there's an element of, we also know what we've missed. I think COVID has helped us identify what we have missed, and I think Pascal, you mentioned whether the home to the office. I think the connections have now been blurred quite a bit, given, I think, to Romilly's point around technology, has just blurred a lot of those typical boundaries that we had before. And I think you know, having that in place in a city is extremely important. And I think the vibrancy of a city is also important. It just shows. And then the final thing is that I think the smart aspect, and I use smart in its broader sense, one around digital. I think we are seeing some big progress being made, whether it be microgrids, and I think Gareth is working quite a lot on these things. But also, you know, you mentioned the carbon-free, you know, not just the future construction, because a lot of the time we talk about carbon-free for future decarbonization, but I think the decarbonisation, retrofitting some of the fantastic infrastructure we already have, which is the biggest challenge that we do have at the moment, and how we retrofit many of those is an important one, and because that will provide some of that flexibility. So for me, connected, vibrant, and smart.
Thank you very much, Anuj. Romilly or Pascal?
Yeah, 2 words come to mind for me, and that's care. I think we've all become much more caring and conscious of each other, and we've been reaching, especially our colleagues in Victoria, and you know, we were checking in, whereas before we were very busy, and Anuj said that we were very busy and very focused, and we have become careful and caring, and mental health has really come to the fore. I think that's something that is affecting all of us. And the other word is collaboration. And it comes back to, we've all been talking about sustainability today and decarbonisation. And the collaboration I've seen cross-jurisdictionally with all governments has been mind-blowing. We meet, a lot of people don't know this, but we meet every 2 weeks for an hour. Infrastructure Australia chairs the cross-jurisdictional meeting, and that's Treasury, Transport and Infrastructure, every jurisdiction, federally and New Zealand. And we meet every 2 weeks, and we're now doing all this work together, and we're collaborating, and we're talking about supply chain, and we're sharing information. And, you know, COVID really pushed that, and that won't go away now. And so the exciting work that we're doing is there's been a number of sustainability, climate scenario, resilience projects that have borne out of this collaboration that we as jurisdictions are now doing together, whereas before we would have done it in isolation. And I can't stress enough about the willingness to collaborate and share. And that will maintain, and I think that's been something that's been really great coming out of COVID.
That's very, very good to hear. And actually, it's picking up on what Pascal pointed around collaborative design and thinking broader. So Pascal, did you want to close this panel with?
I will be brief because we're very tuned with Romilly. My word was empathy. Empathy within companies. I think a large majority of companies in this country have done the right thing by their employees so far in a very difficult context. Empathy of citizens trying to do the right thing and going to be tested when even 90% of them are asymptomatic. So it's not about themselves, they know they contribute to the community at large. And finally, something I'm very glad that Romilly mentioned, because our small community where I live has been deeply affected by suicide and among young people. We had 4 of them within a couple of weeks. And the way the communities have come together, yeah, it's reassuring. Yeah. This is really what I take out of it as a positive.
Thanks very much, Pascal. Thank you, all of you, for the generosity of your time and sharing insight. And we heard how we can build a vision for future cities being connected, vibrant, smart, caring, sustainable, and collaborative. So thank you very much. I pick up on your proposal, Romilly, that we gather again in 2 years' time to discuss how many minutes we'll be talking about, whether it will be 10 minutes, 30 minutes, or 50 minutes cities, and how we actually include that in our work pattern and day-to-day life. So can I just thank you again on behalf of the French Chamber of Commerce. For all the participants, please stay with us online. There will be a live Zoom and Q&A, and the link will be on the side of the chat module. So thank you very much again.